Corporate Board Member presents an informational webcast.
Welcome to the Corporate Board Member Informational Webcast. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to bring you a very interesting webcast today where we're going to be talking about key action points in conducting internal investigations. And we're lucky enough to have an expert with us today to help us get through this important topic. Let me introduce Dan Karson, who's the chairman of Kroll Advisory Solutions, and they are a global corporate investigations firm that has been around for a long time and has a great reputation. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you, TK.
So the first thing that I think we want to do is sort of set a foundation for what we're going to talk about, and that is we need to sort of establish what sort of prompts or gets us into the mode of internal investigation. So could you give some examples of sort of what people may be familiar with?
Sure. Major corporations are confronted with allegations of bribes paid to foreign officials, paid through intermediaries to foreign officials, for the loss of intellectual property by theft, the fraud committed in the purchasing of millions of dollars of goods and services, hacking into information technology systems. That's a broad umbrella of the kinds of corporate crimes that corporations face.
Well, and I suspect we don't have to look too far to see examples of that, do we?
No, in fact, in today's media, the treasurer of Dixon, Illinois, the hometown of Ronald Reagan, was convicted of stealing more than $50 million through the theft of government funds. And I would have thought that $50 million was 20 or 30 years of Dixon, Illinois' budget, but in fact, she was able to get away with it. But it's a lesson because it's very typical of the kind of fraud that is committed both in the government and in the private sector.
Now, I've always heard that whenever you have these situations reporting, again, whether it's whistleblower, FCPA, or what it is, that the first 48 hours are the most critical.
Very critical. It's important to determine the nature of the allegation that's been made, how much substance there is to it, whether action should be taken to investigate the allegation, who the universe of suspects may be, who the universe of witnesses may be, and to act very quickly in retrieving evidence as swiftly as possible. It's very important for the corporation to get their arms around the material evidence, the paper evidence, and also the electronic evidence that may provide evidence of the commission of the crime. In addition, it's extremely important to determine if the company is in a regulated industry like finance or pharmaceuticals, whether there is a duty to report this allegation to either a law enforcement agency or to a regulator.
And what should the board be doing specifically during this first 48 hours?
The board should have in place a reporting mechanism and also establish the mechanism or the organization that's going to be conducting the investigation. And it's the general counsel or C-suite officer who's reporting to that board committee on who has been appointed to conduct the investigation and on progress reports that are delivered during the course of the investigation.
And it seems to be very apparent when a company has not gone through the process of creating a crisis plan. You see it all the time in the poor response and ultimately the reputation to the company.
It can be very damaging if it's clear or apparent that nobody's really in control. That was evident probably most conspicuously in the Duke University investigation of the lacrosse team, where the university seemed to be speaking with multiple voices, but also, most critically, the very rash decisions were taken before facts were in hand. The coach was fired, the members of the team were vilified, and the accuser was essentially given full credibility for a story that was later disproved.
Yeah, that was very unfortunate. But I can remember on serving on a board that people telling me that if you self-reported an incident that you found to enforcement or the regulators, that, quote, life would go easier for you. But at the same time, one of the challenges of serving on a board is you shouldn't necessarily be reporting everything. Some things aren't reportable. So that makes a challenge of determining what's reportable and what's not reportable.
That is a critical decision. Not every case is reportable. And if it is a situation where, for example, if it's a pharmaceutical company that has determine that there are adulterated drugs that have been distributed into the market, that's clearly reportable. If there has been a major case of insider trading that's taken place, clearly reportable. And if it is reportable, there's no question that in most cases, not all, the company will be given some consideration for self-reporting, may be given the opportunity to conduct its own internal investigation and keep the regulator or the law enforcement agency apprised. But in probably most circumstances, there is not a necessity of reporting. It's important that the investigation be conducted. But when you do turn the investigation over to law enforcement, you are losing control of that investigation. So it's an important judgment that should be made internally by general counsel, but very important first to get your arms around what it is that's been alleged and what action should be taken.
So let's, for the purposes of us today, let's assume that we have an investigation that's not reportable and we're doing that in-house ourselves, and we've been good enough to lock down email and all the social media avenues that one has to lock down. There ends up to be just a mountain of data and emails and whatever. How does one go about sorting through, quote, and finding the evidence?
It's great to have a wealth and a mountain of electronic evidence available. That's a good thing. Reducing that mountain of information to usable evidence can be obtained or achieved through deduplication, through keyword searching, and through predictive coding. So that's not the big problem. The good thing is to have that wealth of information in hand. In almost every case, there is going to be something in the form of evidence contained in an email, in an electronic file, in a Word document, in an Excel spreadsheet, or on some social networking site. I used to say, or I was getting to the point where I was saying it's kind of a trite expression to think that you're definitely going to find incriminating evidence in email, and lo and behold, along comes the Petraeus case, when in fact a trove of information, it's not even an argument as to whether the underlying misconduct took place. It's there, it's an email. So it's further proof that electronic evidence is a critical source of information, and it's very important that the corporation lock down that information as quickly as possible.
I would assume at that point that internally nobody is prepared to do that kind of, other than locking it down, to do the analysis. So I assume that that's where the outside experts come in to have a process to go through and identify all this.
Very important to have an expert computer forensic group come in and retrieve that evidence. Merely turning on the computer itself can have the effect of erasing evidence. Companies routinely have a set period of time, 90 days, 120 days, not in the financial industry, where data is deleted from the server. It's very important, since we're always looking back at crimes, to have the suspension of data from a hard drive suspended during the pendency of the investigation.
Well, here again, as it relates to emails, I don't think we have to look too far, do we, in the news to find a perfect example of the smoking emails, do we?
No, the Petraeus case is probably the best poster child type example of where incriminating evidence and relevant evidence can be found.
So we want to make sure that we leave the audience with sort of the takeaways on what's the most pieces of information to take away from this webcast. So Dan, could you just summarize sort of the key points that board members and GCs should take away from this as far as their role in internal investigations?
Act quickly. The first 24 and 48 hours are very important. Make sure all evidence that is within the corporation's control in the form of electronic data and hard copy documents are secured. Speak to, interview the whistleblower or the accusing party immediately. Identify who the key players are going to be, whether they are employees, former employees, vendors, customers, others who may have relevant information. Determine whether you're going to notify your regulator or a law enforcement agency. And very important, if there's a key suspect who is an employee of the company, search that employee's office for relevant evidence, assuming the corporation has in place policies and doctrines by which your employees consent and acknowledge that there is no expectation of privacy in their email, in their webmail, or in the offices that they occupy. We have found in case after case that highly relevant information may be found in a search of the employee's office.
Well, I'd just like to add to that to make sure that your organization has a plan too. It ends up being quite a fire drill, if one isn't organized when all this stuff hits the fan. And today, when things go viral at the blink of an eye, you better have an organization that has a plan, or you're going to find yourself on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for sure.
Absolutely. It's like preparing for a nor'easter. You've got to have FEMA, the emergency, the first responders ready to go when you know that storm is heading your way.
So how can somebody, if they want to get a hold of you or they want more information, what's the best way for somebody to reach back on this particular topic?
Email me at dkarson@kroll.com, DKARSON at Kroll, KROLL.com, or our website, www.krolladvisory.com.
Dan, thank you for joining us, and I have a feeling will be no shortage of work as it relates to your business. And that's an unfortunate statement, but we're seeing it true every day in the papers. And that will conclude this edition of our Corporate Board Member Informational Webcast. Join us again when we'll take a look at another topic that'll help you be a better director. Thanks for joining us.
This has been a presentation of Corporate Board Member, an NYSE Euronext company.